so much to all of you for being here with us today. It would be great if we could start with hearing a little bit more about you and your journeys to where you are today. So if you could start by summarising as much as you can a little bit about your careers today and where you are at the moment. Cassie, kick us off?
Yeah, can we go first? So I've been in SaaS marketing for over 8 years now. After graduating from university, I got a graduate role at a company called Mindflick, which, as some of you may know, was our CEO Sean's previous e-learning company. There I learned a lot about the industry and also how to build a culture-driven brand and be part of a really highly productive marketing team. The company was then acquired in 2017, and I spent some time outside of the industry working in student advertising. And then fast forward to today, I originally joined Thrive as head of marketing and now have been chief marketing officer for the past 2.5 years. At Thrive now, I have built our marketing function from scratch, lead our marketing and brand strategy and the team, and really work with our leadership team to work towards our commercial goals as well.
Thank you so much, Cass. And Grace?
Hi, I'm Grace. I started my first business about 7 years ago now, nearly 7 years ago, and that was all about making fitness solutions for everyone. So removing the kind of stigmas from the fitness industry that especially women face, that's all about just intimidation and insecurity, and instead making fitness a solution that is based on kind of things you love. So at Shreddy, we kind of believe that you don't need to do workouts you hate to get results you love, and we've kind of created a fitness tech platform around that. And then I started my second business about 3.5 years ago now, which is called Tala, and we make sustainable activewear. And we do that at a price point that is competitive to non-sustainable activewear, because essentially when I was looking in the industry in my own kind of personal exploration of moving away from fast fashion, I essentially realised that there were no solutions really within the activewear industry that weren't double the price, and versus kind of other areas of sustainable fashion, you couldn't really do pre-owned, you couldn't really do rental, because you don't really want to rent someone's sweaty activewear, and these were kind of sold as solutions, but to me weren't really accessible solutions that were going to get people changing from previous consumption habits to more sustainable consumption habits. So we essentially make activewear that is more sustainable, using recycled and upcycled materials, and looking at our entire supply chain in terms of how we can make that better every single step of the way. And we do that at a price point that is competitive to non-sustainable activewear. God, I really can't say that today, which isn't very good for my job. Yeah, so that's kind of what I've been doing for the past 3.5 years, and within the past year, we've kind of pretty much, well, in the past 6 months, we've pretty much doubled our headcount after closing a seed round in December.
Thank you. And Nicola?
So I'm Nicola Kilner, I'm CEO and co-founder at Deciem. We're probably best known for our skincare brand, The Ordinary. In terms of my career, so after university I started at Boots as a beauty buyer. I was there for a few years, fortunate enough to meet Brendan Truex, and then Deciem started in 2013. For the first 3 years, it was definitely the traditional difficult startup. We tried 10 different beauty brands, had bits of success, but other than one of them, none of them exist today. And then we actually came up with a concept for The Ordinary, more as a marketing point, to actually talk about transparency in the beauty industry, ingredients, what the price point really should be to make it more accessible, in the viewpoint that people would see that brand and then decide to actually buy our other more expensive brands because they had much more in them. The Ordinary exploded overnight. We now ship 100 million units a year. I think we went through quite a public, difficult time when our founder Brendan actually passed away, and we had lots of mental health struggles, really kind of managing the business through that. And it was also about the same time when we raised investment, so Estee Lauder Companies became our majority owner. We got a $2.2 billion valuation when we raised that investment a couple of years ago. So yeah, navigating the fast growth startup into kind of merging into the more corporate world.
And Jacqueline?
Yes, hello everyone, my name is Jacqueline Gold. I'm the executive chair of Ann Summers. And it's been quite a colourful journey, I have to say. So I started my career working for Royal Dalton, and I was still am very creative. So my ambition, based on the careers advice, was to be a window dresser. But I was invited to a Pippa Dee party, which I know many of you won't have heard of, but it was rather like, I suppose, Next doing home parties. And I remember going to this, in fact, I remember very distinctly sitting in this sort of smoky room on a sofa with 12 other women, drawing a picture of my husband's meat and 2 veg on the top of my head, thinking, actually, this is not quite how I expected my careers to start. But here I am, 41 years later, and I founded Ann Summers as we know it today in 1981, and yeah, it's as I said, it's been a very colourful but enjoyable journey.
Thank you so much. So continuing with the idea of your journey, Grace, it would be great to hear a little bit about kind of going back to when you founded your first business. When you reflect, were there any skills or traits that you think you had at the time which really helped you to succeed?
I'd say weirdly probably my biggest skill at the time was naivety, and I think that definitely helped because, you know, I essentially was kind of creating content online at the time, and I was also working at IBM doing a internship, and I essentially kind of wanted to be able to monetize the stuff I was doing online because I was taking about as much time doing that as I was working in this kind of corporate job, and that seemed insane that there was kind of nothing, I guess, monetary coming from that, despite the amount of time I was spending on it. So the original business actually started from me attempting to make the content I was doing monetizable in a way that didn't kind of create barriers between me and this audience. It was quite a small audience at the time. So I started the business, so Shreddy, my first business, the one that was about 6.5, 7 years ago now, I started that literally just by making PDFs. So that was kind of PDFs of the existing content I was doing at the time. Currently, maybe wouldn't recommend, but essentially at the time that all I did was I kind of put all the information together, paid a friend of mine who was a graphic design student about £50 to mock that up into something that would look relatively nice, built a little Shopify site on a theme, put a plugin in there that essentially meant that each person who bought it would kind of get it sent, and just saw everything as just like one step after the other. I feel like now, having done it for about 7 years, every decision probably has a few more steps. But actually one of the most valuable things at the time was that I didn't know necessarily how big each step was going to be or how much each kind of new product was going to bring a new challenge and all of these things. So a lot of that I kind of try and bring into the everyday now, and try and not, you know, it's really important to consider all areas of a decision, but actually try and not overthink a lot of the things that actually back then I would have just been like, yeah, let's try it, let's see if it works. If it doesn't work, that's fine. It could also be the next big breakthrough. And I would say that every big breakthrough I have had with either of the businesses, whether it's a product, whether it's a way of working, any of these things, has just been a small test at the beginning that, as Nicola said, with kind of the idea for The Ordinary, was usually just things being like, oh, we can have this as a little aside. We did that with our app 2.5 years into the business, and now that is the core of the business, a huge proportion of the revenue, and also far more profitable than the rest of the business. So I would say, annoyingly, because you can't really apply naivety to everything, but I try to, in a really considered and sensible way. But yeah, I would say that was kind of one of the things that I think pretty much gets zapped out of you, but actually is so essential, especially within entrepreneurship, and I try and kind of preserve that where I can.
Yeah, and that's definitely a theme I think that's come through today, not kind of obsessing over perfection and maybe trying something, seeing if it works, from Stephen this morning and through to the customer panel later in the day. Nicola, what about you? Skills or traits in the early days of your career that you think helped you succeed?
I think I've always had quite a positive outlook, and I remember in the early days at Boots and becoming a buyer in negotiation and having some training in, you know, they talk about the clock face and where you sit, and I mean, my worst nightmare is to kind of be a hard shouting, you know, they used to teach us tricks, and I thought, gosh, I never want to do that, you know. I'm sure we can get further in business with collaboration and honesty and actually just working together. And I think, you know, it's nice now, even just seeing females in leadership roles that actually kind of more of those kindness and those softer qualities now I actually think have big strength in leadership in the business. So I think in the early days, definitely this kind of kindness and a softer approach, which I always worried would hold me back as we went away, but actually I think it's been a big strength.
And Jacqueline, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Well, first of all, I was visionary because I had this passion that I wanted to empower women in the bedroom, and if you go back 40 years ago, you know, it was a very, very different environment. You couldn't even buy sexy underwear in the high street like you can today. So I think many people probably in this room won't realise the crusade that we've been on, but I did have that vision, I did have that passion. I think what I lacked, the two things that I think I lacked was definitely, I was very shy at 21 years old when I started, but what you think is a disadvantage at the time, I think it was Grace actually said that you know, naivety is a good thing because it forces you to rely on feedback from your customers. You know, I had no business experience or experience in retail or whatever, so actually see that as a positive. It can be very refreshing. I think the other thing, you know, again, I've learned, and you do learn as you become more experienced, is I became more of a people person as time went on. You can't do all these things on your own. You have to, you know, get other people involved and on that journey with you, and that's something that I think I do now very well.
Thank you. And Cassie, which skills do you think you've had to develop since the beginning of your career?
Oh, that's a good one. I think staying calm whilst trying to solve problems is probably the main one. I think I've tried to develop a knack of being able to remain calm and keep my cool. I mean, yesterday was probably a different story, having to try and set up the venue and deal with AV and tech and testing. But I think one of the things that I've really tried to develop is staying confident and staying calm whilst trying to solve a problem.
Thank you. Jacqueline, what do you think has been your biggest challenge that you've faced? I know that's probably... I paused there because I know there's probably quite a few stories, but
well,
one that stands out.
Would that be the one where I was arrested? Would it be the one where I took the government to court? Or maybe it was when I got the bullet through the post? It could be any three. So yeah, I mean, I obviously, what I did was very culture changing, and it challenged people in very different ways. I mean, I tried to, I remember trying to organise a conference in Coventry, actually. They had this suite of conference rooms. I don't know if they still had them, but when they found out who it was for, they actually cancelled the contract. So I had a lot of challenges, a lot of work. I suppose my biggest business challenge was changing perceptions. And, you know, Ann Summers has gone from, if you like, the Raincoat Brigade to really a female institution is what it is today. So we had 10% of our customers were women then, whereas today, you know, you go and it's 80% of customers in our stores would be women.
Incredible. Nicola, you mentioned a little bit earlier about some of the challenges that you've been through more recently with your founder and mental health in the workplace. What are some of the other challenges that you've faced?
I think just the fast growth. I mean, in the last 2 years, we've added 900 people to our headcount because we do our own production, we have retail. And I think just when you go through that fast growth, you make wrong decisions, you make wrong hires, everything's in a rush, everything needed to happen yesterday. And I think when you're also a people-focused business and you have this ethos about being kind, but then when ultimately it's people you're dealing with, and as a company you're the one that's made mistakes but they impact people, I think that's been one of the hardest challenges to deal with.
And Grace?
I would say that some of the biggest things as well have come from attempting to kind of grow a team that remains in the kind of essence of the company that you want to keep, in the culture and the people and all of these things. And I think because when I particularly started to grow Tala in terms of the headcount, which is the sustainable activewear company, I think a lot of the time I mistook I've always been quite good at admitting where where something's not my strength. And I feel like because I've always been quite young in comparison to the people I've worked with, that's always been something that's come quite naturally to me, because it wouldn't make sense for me to sit there and be like, no, I know this, because actually, the reason I've hired these people is because they're far better than me at what they do. And that's always been something that I've really tried to kind of keep with me. But it's also meant that when I've built a team, I've often, and there was kind of a period of time where I felt continuously made the mistake of mistaking someone's, I guess, experience and authority versus, being a right culture fit. So I would kind of meet someone and I'd be like, God, they're, so good at all of these things, have all of this experience, and therefore must be the best person to do this job. And I think there was a real period of time where I was kind of trying to grow the team like that, and we had the original team of people. We had kind of some new people who were amazing at their job, but actually a lot of the time weren't a good culture fit, and I kind of mistook experience for something that actually probably wasn't the right thing for the kind of startup in the size it was. And I think that actually being able to take it back and say, actually, no, this is what the company is, this is what the type of company we want to build, so who are the types of people and what type of work do they do? And, in our case, it's people who are a lot more collaborative, people who are really open to feedback, people who are not necessarily hugely hierarchical. It's all about, if I, as the founder of the company, I'm happy to sit somewhere and say, what, I have no idea, but I'm happy to, I want to give my opinion, but actually I have no idea, I'd love to hear your opinion on it. We need to have the whole kind of company representing that type of culture and just be really collaborative and kind and all of these things. And I think I definitely needed to learn the lesson that it's not always, having a big, you don't need to gain people with extra experience and have like a huge amount of kind of hierarchy be built into those things. And I think that was definitely something I had to learn along the way. And there are lots of different types of companies and lots of different types of people. And it's about, working out what type of one you want to have.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure with all of you being part of businesses that have grown, that's certainly something that can resonate at different levels. And Cassie, for you, same question.
I think when Jacqueline earlier you mentioned perceptions, I think for me that rings true is probably one of my biggest challenges that I still face today. I think when I first joined Thrive, and one of the first calls I hopped on, someone actually asked me if I could speak to someone more senior, and that was before I even had a chance to kind of introduce myself and tell them who I was. And it happened recently as well. I was at an exhibition, we do lots of conferences where we demo, and a man walked on the stand and said, is anyone on the stand that I can speak to that's actually over the age of 25? And when you're kind of standing there and you're looking around, and we've got quite a young team, and that is because, like you said, Grace, like culture fit rings true so much for us at Thrive. And I think what I really struggle with is Thrive is a company where we've got a culture where it's not necessarily about experience, like you said, Grace, it's about who the person is right for the job. And actually, we really value potential and growth and opportunities over experience in most cases. So I think I really struggle with that stark contrast of being within an organisation where opportunities are limitless and all of your colleagues have so much respect for each other, and then having to face the external world where you have to gain that trust all over again and reintroduce yourself and gain people's respect all over again.
Thank you. Just moving on to talk a little bit more about advocating for women in the workplace. I'd love to hear about what you each think empowering women in the workplace is, how you would describe it, what it looks like in your organisation. Cassie, if I could start with you.
So I think, to me, like, female empowerment is all about lifting each other up, celebrating each other's successes, each other's talents and achievements, instead of actually looking at each other as competition. Short and sweet.
Well, there's two things for me. The first is ever since I started what I was doing, I've always pushed those boundaries and around female bias. Started off in the bedroom, and then of course now in the boardroom, which is so important. And it's always been my mission to constantly push back on those female stereotypes. But I also have a 13-year-old daughter, so for me, there's something much more important. I took my daughter to see me speak, actually at an event similar to this when she was 5 years old, because I wanted her to see her mum on stage talking and realising actually this is not just something that men do. So for me, for her to be able to grow up in a world where she not only has equal opportunities, but also the confidence to navigate her future without the gender bias that's, we just heard that experience that you had. It's horrendous, and if I could just say, it doesn't just happen to young women. You mentioned about somebody over 25. It happens to all women, and it still occasionally happens to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally, and this isn't job done. When we celebrated the 100 years of the suffragettes, there were people doing vox pops on Sky News and saying, it's job done. It really isn't job done. And actually, it will continue until we stop having these conversations.
Thank you. And Nicola?
So I think with female empowerment, I actually think a lot of it, we focus sometimes on the symptoms, and I actually think, workplaces have become so much better at empowering women, but I actually think when you look at households, and there's men in this room and everyone's in different relationships, but I think still today so much of just the mental load of a household, of children, of what's for dinner tonight, of those things still often lies with a woman. And therefore that is going to have an impact then in the workplace, because they are having to think about more than just their career. So I think whilst actually employees have done a lot, I think still as society, we all talk about equality, but I think it's a big challenge to us as we're raising sons, as we're kind of in those households. How do we actually really make sure that all of those responsibilities are shared, to make sure that actually both parties have that kind of equal energy to go into the workplace and succeed?
Yeah, thank you. And Grace, it'd be interesting to hear as well, you talking about the type of business you're building and how it's expanding. Like, what does it mean to you in the organisation that you're building now?
Yeah, well, we so obviously what we do at Tala is we make clothes for women, and a lot of the time, you see products made for women and they are not made by women, and they're often not made with women in leadership positions as well. So when I was building that company, as much as, or statistically, women hire more women and hire more women into leadership positions as well, but also, if we're building a product for women, to me it is absolutely essential that there are women in the rooms that are making those decisions. And that sounds so obvious, but it is so not the case. I was talking recently about the fact that actually, the largest period app, for example, is owned and built by men, and they were done for selling data the other day. Like, what does that mean for, when all of these products that are essentially like made for women, if you go up the chain, it's actually, that data is owned and kind of whatever it might be, or like decisions are made in the rooms by men, or at least not having women there. That is obviously hugely problematic. So for me, although it sounds so normal that there would be women in the room making decisions about the products that are kind of being created for women, and it is specifically for women at Tala, that kind of seems absolutely insane. So for me, it's always about making sure that, when you talk about women empowerment happens a lot easier when there are more women in leadership positions, even because of those small things, for example, that, actually, if you're, we talk about a lot how the primary caregivers are still the majority of the time women. Also making sure, for example, social events at work happen in work hours rather than outside of work hours. That's such a normal decision for someone to make if it's a woman in that leadership position who has children, because they're actually probably going to be going back to that themselves, and it would really affect them and their progression if those things were held after work. So I feel like the more, obviously, as higher up the chain, the more you can get that, the more equal. Those types of decisions just become so natural. It's not about adding things in and sprinkling them on top to make sure that women are empowered. It's actually being like, inherently, there are more women here, and therefore decisions are going to be made without that bias in place, whether that's about children or whether that's not about children at all, whatever that might be. So for me, it's just been really important to make sure that the actual, not just at a lower level, but throughout the organisation and also on our board as well, when we were raising investment, all of those things, how many women can we get in the room, especially because we're making those actual products for women.
Yeah, and Jacqueline, I'm sure you will have seen an evolution of what this looks like in the workplace and from a boardroom point of view, in terms of having more women in leadership positions and creating that sense of empowerment in an organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to repeat all what we've heard, because I absolutely agree with that. But what I can tell you is that Ann Summers, 80% of our board are female. Our top 4 largest earners are all women, and I'm extremely proud of that. And I think it's very inspirational for those in the business, and I think it's very attractive to those coming into the business. But one of the things I would just add to the question, if you don't mind, and that is, I think it's very important when you're looking for, you know, a company that you want to work for. I think what these ladies here have explained very eloquently is it's important about what are the values of that company, and do you share those values? Are they aligned with the way you feel? Do they support women? You know, are there initiatives for women? Is there a way of women coming through the pipeline? So, hope that would be my take on it.
Thank you. And Nicola, we were talking a bit earlier about, you know, how we create equal opportunities in the workplace. What are DECIEM doing at the moment to create that space that feels more equal for people in the organisation?
One thing I think we're fortunate for at DECIEM is because we have had such growth in recent years, we haven't inherited maybe historic, like when you look, we have more females than men in our leadership positions. Like it's a very, I sometimes think, you know, if you could design a company now today, like I think we've done well at making those equal opportunities. One of the topics we're really talking about at the moment is in terms of hybrid working, and, you know, we're returning to the workplace. And actually, whilst we've made so much progression with equality, we're not there yet on gender, but it's definitely further ahead than it was in the past. But actually, we're potentially facing quite a crisis where, you know, we know that statistically speaking, men are more excited about going back into the office 5 days a week. Women are like, please don't make it more than 2 days, I've got to fit everything else in. So we're talking about actually, you know, most companies are doing minimum days, but actually, do we need almost maximum days? Because if workplaces get to a place where actually you do have men going in 5 days a week and women are only now going in 2 days a week, we also know statistically that being seen is part of career progression. If you're not there in the room for those conversations, the coffee break chats. So actually, you know, I think this pandemic has made a huge impact on just the working world, and it's, again, maybe an opportunity for us to actually re-look, but make sure that actually we are making decisions that make sure that we continue to progress gender equality, not do anything that risks stepping it back.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting challenge that lots of organisations are facing as we're returning back to potentially being in the office more, that idea of proximity bias and the presenteeism, and how you make sure that people still have equal opportunities to opportunities. So staying in that same kind of train of thought, Grace, I'd love to hear your thoughts around more women-only learning initiatives, so, you know, programmes like focusing on developing women in leadership roles.
I mean, I'd say I'm probably the worst person to ask for that at the moment, because we're still very much in our kind of early stages. We're only even developing an HR kind of team now. So in terms of actually working out those types of things that we want to add to the business and want to be able to kind of help nurture people, we're still a very small team. So, you know, we really encourage people to take these learning opportunities. We put a lot in front of the people in our team, but also actually I think one of the biggest things that you know, it's really easy for you to feel like you're ticking a box by, I think, kind of doing a lot of these things, and actually it has to come from the wider organisation as well. Like, I think a lot of the time we put the onus on women to improve things for women, and actually, unless it's something that's seen as a more comprehensive view of how actually, you know, if there's one group that currently is in more leadership positions, all of these kind of general different gaps within the workplace, actually, you know, the onus should very much, probably more even, be on that side to be able to kind of help that. So whilst, you know, I absolutely want to encourage, and we do actively encourage women to be kind of taking those opportunities, and I think more, you know, there are incredible resources out there, and especially, you know, when you're looking at something that so specifically kind of affects a certain group of people, of course it's going to be really useful to have kind of that specific information, and I can't, you know, recommend that enough. But I also think it is really important to look at that, you know, at the same time, perhaps more men should be going to, kind of how to nurture those women in leadership roles, or kind of nurture that when it might be someone in their team who is going to have more of the things that, you know, perhaps in terms of like managing a household or children or all of those things, and how to make sure that those biases aren't coming into play when they're making decisions too. So yes, that would kind of be my opinion on that.
Okay. And I think it's a really interesting point you raised, that obviously we often box leadership skills into certain things that potentially don't reflect some of the traits and skills we actually talked about at the beginning of this conversation, and it's really astute observation of that fact, and actually how do we rebalance.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of the time, you know, we read about those things, or I feel like my association with learning about leadership as a woman has often been kind of listing a male set of traits and listing a female set of traits and being like, this is why men are in leadership positions. And it's obviously, first of all, that's a hugely shallow looking at the kind of landscape of why there are more men in leadership positions and the pay gap and all of these things. But when you kind of have this list, and it's like, actually a lot of those things on that list, I want it, if we're kind of separating these into these things, and we're saying actually women might traditionally be more collaborative, men might be more firm, all of these things, again, it's the onus on people to change kind of the parts of their personality where they also those might be things that we need to now, rather than changing those into ones that we traditionally see as more kind of leadership traits, we perhaps need to see leadership as a wider view, and we do start to see it more kind of collaboratively, because historically, if it has been more men in those positions, there are going to be those more male traits. I don't think it shouldn't be about switching the way you lead. Of course, there is a huge amount of development. We all need development. I definitely kind of need development. But I think that, changing that and actually changing the way we see leadership to be something that's more balanced, I think can be super valuable as well.
Thank you. Moving on a little bit from kind of more broadly the workplace and thinking specifically about developing your people now, I think it would be really useful for people to understand from you as women in leadership roles who sit on boards, who are in the C-suite, how can L&D teams best engage and get you excited about new learning initiatives and technology? Definitely would be great to hear from you first.
Okay, I just want to say something on the last point as well. One of the things that I think is so great about today is that there are so many men in the room. And whilst I'm really, really supportive of female-only learning initiatives, I just think there's a couple of things that are important to share that we've learned, certainly at Ann Summers. I think women-only groups are good when you want to talk about things like confidence and building that confidence. But when we talk about equality, it isn't a female problem, it's an everybody problem. In fact, as has sort of been said, it impacts the whole household. When there's not equal monies coming in, etc. And I think one of the things that we've done at Ann Summers is, we're doing a female, we originally called it female first, but we changed it to female focused, because it's so important to have the men in your business, they are agents of change. We think it's really important to nurture that allyship, we're in this together, we need to be supporting each other. So when we talk about initiatives like, in our female focus initiative, that includes, a loss of a baby. It includes going for IVF. It includes menopause. It includes, a lot of the things that actually apply much more to modern day living and that are relevant in 2020. But the way we have done it is we've made sure that we give the same benefits to our male colleagues as well. And I think everybody, needs to be inclusive and supportive of women at the same time. Sorry, what was your second question?
Literally just written, it's an everyone problem.
I'll be very quick on the second point, is how do you engage? I think you said, how do you bring everybody on board in L&D?
I think for L&D professionals that are in the room, understanding how to engage and get leadership teams excited with new technology or new learning initiatives.
So, I'll be quick because I've taken up a lot of time already, but I think that it needs to come from the top. You need, if your leader is bought into it, and that obviously feeds on down, I think that you need to have really good measures of success so that people can see what colleagues can see what they are getting from it, and you as their direct report can see. And I think whatever you do, it needs to be engaging. I noticed when our platform for Thrive first went up that 85% of our colleagues logged in within the first 2 weeks. I think that's very successful. And we actually had a similar reaction when we worked with the Retail Trust on people's mental health and well-being. We had a fantastic response there, and I think that what Thrive have been able to do is to do this in a modern way, in a very relatable way, not bits of paper. You know, it's online, it's got a sort of a social media feel to it, so everybody can share their experiences and engage with each other. So I think carry on that theme. You know, that is what people relate to and engage with.
Thank you. And Cass, I want to ask you a question about how, or what key factors you've seen about making a learning culture stick, and I think this is thinking from the technology and the platform provider side.
Yeah, I think the things that really make a learning culture stick is making it about your people. I think Thrive, as you all know here today, it's all about social learning, and I think there's a few things that we work with customers on around like getting teams of learning influencers to get involved in activities and competitions and content sharing. And I think putting your people at the heart of that really helps create that buzz. Obviously, I think everyone here loves running campaigns, and I think for me, campaigns really help set a talking point. They really help set a focus. They give people a reason to discuss, to comment, to even debate about a certain topic, just like we are today. And Thrive is a great platform to obviously do that online. So I think setting that topic, setting that focus and getting people engaged, I think is a really good way to make that culture stick. And through that, naturally, people will get more involved because you're giving them a reason to, and then they get used to it, and then that habit starts to build, right? They start sharing a little bit of content that's quite accessible and easy. It might be a link, it might be a picture, and then they'll actually start to get more confident, and actually you'll find yourself in a place where actually your subject matter experts are sharing content on your behalf, and actually we as L&D teams can just nurture that culture that naturally grows because you put your people at the heart of it.
Thank you. We are running a little close to the wire, so I do just want to open it up to see if there are any questions. Yes, over here.
I just want to say that thank you for the time. It's been incredibly listening. As a male, white male myself, I have the highest level of privilege. I have a 3-year-old daughter who in 20 years is going to enter the workforce. You guys, I'm quite passionate about it, but what are the 3 things, or 2 things, or 1 thing that we as men can take into organisations in the positions we're in, which every organisation have different levels of sway, of course, but what is that 1 or 2 things we can do tomorrow that's genuinely going to move the needle on equality? Because we're nowhere near now. Naturally, COVID has set the dial back. There are fewer women in the workforce than there was 60 years ago. What can we do? What are the 1 or 2 things that we can do tomorrow that are going to really change the game?
So 1 or 2 things that, quite a big ask, can change the game tomorrow. Is that directed to anyone or just to the panel as a whole? Yeah, okay.
Well, I feel like I've got a tick list, and actually some of it's even inspiration just from having this conversation today. So I think there's maybe a few things I'm going to say back. 1, I think it's a really good point about social events, keeping it in working hours, because actually as a mum of 2 young children myself, I also find it difficult when things are in at night and it means missing bedtime, etc. I also think there's a big point in terms of, you know, people talk around, should we have learning courses focused for females? But actually, kind of think Jackie said made me think actually it should almost be focused at men, because actually this problem isn't just with females, it's with everyone. And then my biggest thing is actually just around kind of how do we have that education around actually that household, that mental, you know, think about, you know, your relationship, like who is truly looking after the split of responsibilities, because it's difficult to expect 2 people to work equally if one has this huge mental household capacity that they're also dealing with. So I think, you know, whilst employers can be quite good at kind of putting the right policies in place, I think kind of actually having that challenge to actually not just looking at the symptoms, but actually the causes, I think, are maybe a bit more closer to home than we might realise. And then also just challenging this, looking at hybrid working, and actually how does that differentiate between men and women as we return to the workplace, to make sure that that proximity bias doesn't become something that sets females back.
Can I just add to that? I thought it was brilliant, by the way. I just, first of all, I just think to hear what you said was so refreshing. I think that we need more people like you, and possibly because you have a young daughter, that's very, forefront of your mind. So I think it's also about, looking at taking a deep dive into the culture of your business, and are there some unconscious bias that goes on that maybe isn't, completely obvious, that we need to make sure the way I've always looked at it throughout my career actually is that I have some amazing talent within my business. And it's as much about holding on to that talent, and when women go on maternity leave, is creating an environment that they feel that if they want to, they can return to without losing their confidence. We do those keep in touch days, and we really, we want to hang on to that amazing talent. And I think it's very sad, but certainly in a much older generation to yours, there is still, those challenging perceptions. And I think the more you can encourage that culture within your business, and also to get men behind realising this is not a female issue, this is an everybody issue.
Yeah, I think so. I completely agree. I think as well, in terms of moving the needle, I think we always think about what's the big stuff. Like, we ask questions around, women in leadership initiatives, what's that specific training program? But I also think, don't forget about the little stuff as well, like the small steps. Before today, we were researching some quotes, and I think it was Queen Elizabeth that said something around, like, it's the little steps that make the big steps. So I think we can take that in L&D as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a huge, training initiatives, but actually, like, take the Content Club as an example. Like, one of my favourite modules in there is, like, Get More Mojo, like how to get more confidence. And I think things like stories about unconscious bias and reading those little snippets every day is like the small steps that are going to move that needle and take those big steps.
Thank you. I think I've got time to squeeze one more question in if there's anyone else. No? Oh, yes, yeah.
So within your whole careers, or whole amazing careers, what was your biggest mic drop, stick it to social conformity moment?
Biggest mic drop, stick it to the social conformity moment. 30 seconds each.
I'll go first on
You
that.
go.
And I'd probably say just being on stage here with these amazing women right now. If I could take my mic off, I probably would, but it's kind of stuck on. I think just, being able to plan events like this, host meaningful conversations like this, I think for me, that's an amazing, I feel proud to be here with all of you.
I'd love to say there was a big moment. I'd say with a lot of these things, they're like little things every day that both kind of make you feel like you've really taken steps in that direction, but also both really grind you down. So I feel like, for me, I think one of the big things that I can very much, I'm really, really proud of is having, finished our seed round with a majority of female investors, majority of female on the kind of board, and all of that despite the fact that, women received, highest year ever, 2.8% of venture funding. So those things, obviously that trickles down to mean every single other area of gender disparity is also kind of thrown off, but I would say probably that was the one thing that when I got to the end of that round, I just thought, this is really great, but also we need to change it. I'd love for that not to be backing the norm.
I think for me, probably the big moment, I guess, was when we got the initial investment from SA Lauder companies. I think as a startup, it's always you feel like you've gone on the right track and kind of done something good. But actually, on the point of the little things, I think 4 days a week is a minimum. I get emails from someone in the team on production line or something, just thanking us for one of the policies we put in place, something that, we have a family fund, baby steps, all of these programs to kind of make their life a bit better. So I think actually it's the little moments that just make us feel that actually we're taking the right progress.
Look, I'm a lot older than you, so I have had more time to have those milestone moments. So I mean, there are many, but my biggest milestone moment, I'm going to get a little emotional here, was actually receiving my CBE from the Queen, which was an amazing moment in my career when I was recognised for entrepreneurship, women in business and social enterprise. And I just want to say, I know this sounds wow, you know, that is a big moment, but if knowing, you know, the background that I came from and the fact that I didn't have experience, and like all these ladies on the panel, I had amazing passion for what I wanted to do, I just want to say that everybody in this room has the potential to, you know, have that, maybe a long time in the future, but, you know, will have that moment, that defining moment that will make you feel proud forever.
We are calling time on our Women in Leadership Power panel. I just want to say it's been an absolute honour to sit with you ladies on the stage. It's actually making me feel a bit emotional, but it's been an incredible day, and I've taken so much away from today, as I'm sure everyone else has. So just thank you once again. One more hand, please.